Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop, and today we're working on some pretty beefy joinery.
It feels so good to get back into the shop and actually get some work done. It has been too long. But we're going to get back to the bench, and we need to resaw up these stretchers. This is one of the short stretchers that'll go from the front to the back, but then we need to do the long stretchers. And I actually did a live video where we were shooting this one, so we watched the whole thing live. Yes, my bench is moving around a lot. It moves off of its marks very easily, and as soon as it does that, one leg is longer than the other, and it just wobbles around. That's one of the problems with the bench only being about 400 pounds. I'm looking forward to having a much heavier bench coming soon. But yes, even my wife got in on the live, and we cut this whole thing up and resawed it down, and there's our stretchers that go from one end to the other. Didn't meet perfectly in the middle, but close enough because we're going to be coming back through and planing this all flat. Speaking of planing it all flat, let's bring this over here and start off with one of the small ones. I like to start with a face, and we want to make sure this is good and true. And so we put winding sticks on there to learn where is it high and where is it low, and we come back in with the plane and we just hit the high spots. And then we take it down until we have a nice, flat, true surface that it doesn't have any twists in it. And I can bring in my smoothing plane and clean that out. Once we have one smooth face, now we're going to transfer that to an edge. And I can go at the edge and make that wind-free, smooth, and flat. Yeah, I know, my bench is crazy. But I can use the scrub plane to get rid of most of it, get it down close, and then I can come back in with another plane and smooth that out and make sure that it is perfectly square to the face that we did earlier. Once we have that, now we can bring in the marking gauge and lay out the marks to make it parallel to the face and the edge that we just did. Then all we have to do is plane it down to those marks. Scrub plane makes very quick work of that, and then after the scrub plane we can come in and take it off with a heavy jack or something of that nature, and then after the jack we can come into the smoothing plane and get a nice beautiful smooth surface on here. So now we have 3 surfaces done. We need to do the fourth surface. And again, we'll do the marking gauge, and this time we'll go all the way around the board and mark off from the front face that we started with. And I need to take off quite a bit on these. I left these larger in every dimension by a heavy amount because I knew they were going to be moving quite a bit after I resawed them down. So I left them much bigger than they need to be. I can scrub it down, traversing the board and going across it, and then come in with my heavy jack and take off most of the scrub marks, and then we can smooth it out, and there's one board, one short board. Now I need to do the other short board and then the 2 long boards. Yeah, I'm not going to force you to watch me banging my head against the wall. Let's move on. So with a little bit of cooking show magic, oh look at that, they're all done. It only took me several days of my life. Now that they're all clean, smooth, and dimensioned the way we want to do, I want to mark them all out and lay out so I know exactly where each stretcher goes in the project and which joint is on which end. Once I do that, we can start off by making a tenon. I picked one end. I didn't really care which end, and we're just going to lay out the width of the tenon to match the chisel. Then I can set my marking gauge to those marks and start cutting it down. And of course, we're making tenons, so I'm going to grab a tenon saw and start cutting down these cheeks. And they are large cheeks. And this tenon saw is a large tenon saw, but it's not as large as it needs to be. So I'm actually going to, for the other side, grab my continental bow saw. And this is what a lot of continental woodworkers will use for most joinery. But for large joints like this, it is phenomenal. You can bend the beam over to the side a little bit and cut all the way down. For the smaller ones, I still prefer using the tenon saw. But then once we get the cheeks all cut down, we can come in with a cross-cut saw and pop out these little pieces. I didn't chisel out the cheeks on this one because the grain was going a little bit wild. I'll show you a little bit later on one that I do. But most of the time, I just end up sawing them out. I find it to be about the same, and I get a much cleaner work. But if it's nice and clean, chisel comes out. So now that we have one tenon, I need to know where the shoulder of the other tenon will be so I can bring it over to the exact place where this will be in the project, and I can mark off with the leg exactly where that tenon is. Then I make another mark a little farther away for how long the tenon needs to be, and we rinse and repeat everything we did, and magically we now have another big tenon cut. Ow, ooh, don't get your finger caught in there. But now that we have one little one, now we need to work on the big ones, and these ones are a problem because they are as long as I am tall, and therefore if I stand them upright like I did before, I'm going to be running into issues. So we have to do everything on a bit of an angle. In this case, I'm going to cut at an angle one way and then turn it, cut at an angle the other way, and that means sometimes my saw is going to have to be at a weird angle, which feels kind of weird in the hand, but it works out. Just take your time and practice it out, and you'll be okay. Some of these are actually good enough with the straight grain so that I can come in and pop out the chips. I just cut down on the shoulders, and then I can pare out the cheeks on them. And this is honestly a lot of fun, though it does, I find, take a little bit longer in some cases, especially with these larger ones. Any of the less little frays that are left over, you can clean up with a shoulder plane and make it look as pretty as you want it to be. Now that we have all of the tenons cut, let's come back over to the legs and cut the mortices. I generally prefer to cut the mortices second because I find it easier to mark out the mortise from the tenon. If you're marking out the tenon from the mortise, it's very difficult to get things in there and get exact. So, oh my, is that a demon-possessed brace? Get rid of that. We don't want that on camera. Wait, stop showing that. Okay. Yeah, I drilled out all the holes. I know, I didn't chop them all out with a brace, so is life. But I've got a lot of these to cut, and they're big, and the drill makes a very quick work of that. With these big ones, it saves a lot of time, and then I can just come back in with a chisel and pare everything right back to the lines. And I'm going to stay away from my lines as long as possible. I'm not going to go right into them because I don't want to move them out. I want to make the joint tight, and then I can adjust it to fit the tenon exactly. I generally find it a little bit easier to adjust the mortise than adjusting the tenon because then it's just chopping down the cheeks. Whereas if I adjust the tenon, I tend to go a little overboard and mess things up. So the mortise makes it a little bit more flexible for me. So we can test this out and see, yeah, that's a bit tight. I don't like where that's going. Let's adjust this down a little bit. Now I know it went down that far, so I'm not going to adjust anything right up at the top. I'm only going to adjust down in where things are sticking out a bit. And then we're going to come back in and test it again. And it's kind of one of these things where you go back and forth until you get a nice clean fit. And the bigger the joint is, actually, the looser you want it to be as the wood moves around a good bit more. But in this case, yeah, that's still a bit too much, and it's going to be kind of fun to get out of there. So we're going to come down, take a little bit more, and go back and forth until we get the fit that we're looking for. Now that's what I want. I want a nice, tight, clamped on fit, and it doesn't really take a huge amount of pounding, but enough to get it down in there. Now we are going to make these drawbore tenons, so we need to bore a hole through the mortise, and this goes all the way down through and into the other side, but I don't want to drill the hole in the exact same place on the tenon. So we're going to put the tenon back into the slot, and it's one of the downsides with drawbore tenons. It tends to go back and forth and back and forth. And then I'm just going to mark the hole of where that is with the auger bit. Now that I have that little dimple, we can take it apart again, and I'm going to move that hole towards the shoulder just a little bit. And so if I angle the drill and then stand it up, that moved it about 1/16 of an inch, just enough to make it where I want. We can go through this hole, and now when they go in, they will offset, and it will pull the shoulder tight. The last thing I need to do on this particular one is put in a shoulder on the inside edge of all of these stretchers. This shoulder will be where we can put the shelf in the future, and will allow the shelf to recess into the top of each of these stretchers. And so this little rabbet running along here is just a simple little rabbet, down about 1/4 inch all the way along the boards, and we can run along and get a nice clean rabbet. And this is a lot of fun. When you get these long curls on here, I could do this all day long and be very happy. Even on the short stretchers, we need to do a little bit of a rabbet on those as well. And we're going to take that down, and this will give us a beautiful little shelves that we can set things on. So yeah, that's about it for today. But I'm having a lot of fun in the shop. More fun to come. And we'll see where this bench goes.
So there you have it, and man, it feels good to actually be building something again in the shop. I am having a ton of fun with this. This is like about 4 days of straight work in the shop, and I love this. So yeah, all of the joinery is basically done on the bench. The next step is going to be doing all the last little details on these pieces, and then the glue up, getting the bench up in place, putting the vices on, and then we can start putting on the 2 leg vices. We got to build a bottom for it, we got to drill the dog holes. There's a lot more to come on this, but I'm looking forward to the next one when I can actually flip it up and turn it into a functioning bench. So stay tuned. But if you have any questions, thoughts, ideas, snide remarks, or would just like to say, let me know that down in the comments down below. Thank you. It does help out the channel. Anytime you like, comment, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Now, I do have to say, there are a bunch of people over there. Those are some of the patrons on Patreon. And we're about to be changing up a few things over on Patreon, adding a few benefits over there, such as free plans every month and a couple other things. So if you want to find out more about that, head over to Patreon. Otherwise, stay tuned and we're going to have some fun. So I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. This bench project is just making me all out of joint.